G'day folks, ZD here. Here's my summary of the important things you need to know from the 0.2.0 patch notes without getting lost and frustrated on useless speculation. Just patch note stuff. If you haven't seen my heads up guide to the new features and big picture stuff, then check out my other video on that. It's probably more important stuff overall for most people. On the whole, I think you should really avoid the temptation to get bogged down in the details of most of the specific nerfs and buffs, more so than ever before, especially on skills. It's probably just gonna confuse, frustrate, and not really help you all that much, given there's just so much lacking context from the patch notes, including just the actual damage numbers of gems. It just says they've been changed. Patch notes mention many skills have had their base damage and or damage growth per level rebalanced. They're not specifically mentioned because they're too widespread, so it's pretty hard to evaluate like changing some numbers on the gem when we don't have the other numbers. So just don't even bother, in my opinion. I'll highlight some specific notable skill balance changes that do have wider effects, but it's pointless to speculate on specific skill changes and try and draw much of any sort of conclusion from them. The overall intention here, though, is to cull everything that was killing pinnacle bosses in a few seconds or clearing screens instantly while running at full speed. But overall, it's a bit more deeper than that. There's a ton of nerfs. There are lots of buffs, and there are 100 new supports, tons of new uniques, new skills, etc, stuff that are going to make new, more powerful builds. But mindset, consider this entire patch a complete meta reset. Imagine that 0.1 was some sort of early beta test, and now a completely new version of the game is coming out in terms of builds and player power. Because, well, it's easy to forget, the game is in beta and that's exactly what's happening. Side note, don't really trust any build guides until a few days in at least. Creators posting anything should really be calling them build speculations or theorycraft or something to that effect right now. Because no, they don't know. None of us know. Approach anything you know about building characters with Energy Shield, Chaos Inoculation, Mind Over Matter, and Eldritch Battery with fresh eyes, because it's all changed dramatically even in terms of just as how they function. The most important thing here is that conversion effects have been changed so that you can't take Chaos Inoculation and then still use Ghost Writhe to get Energy Shield from seemingly nowhere. That didn't make much sense, so it's not too surprising that that one has changed. Ghost Writhe and other sources of added Energy Shield like that, such as Everlasting Gaze, have also been heavily nerfed. Grim Feast has also just been straight up removed from the game. It was obviously carrying a lot in terms of total survivability and recovery for Energy Shield builds. It may be returned after a rework in the future, but for now you'll need to explore other options for Energy Shield recovery, such as recharge. Those changes are going to bring Energy Shield much more in line with life overall, I suspect. Probably still going to be stronger, we'll see. Mana and Archmage. As expected, mana stacking and Archmage have been heavily nerfed. I mean, Archmage was still over 60% of my total damage, so I think we all saw that coming. Anyone who used it saw that coming. There's less percentage mana scaling on items on the tree now. There's less flat mana available on the gear modifiers, so the top end of that has been lowered. Archmage is now 3% added lightning instead of 8% total, and the mana cost increase on it is higher now as well. Archmage is honestly probably still viable, but it's a very heavy nerf, so it shouldn't be on literally every spellcaster now, but rather dedicated Archmage builds. Eldritch Battery now also comes with a mana cost increase downside too. There's a bit more, but that's the main stuff. Attribute stacking, as expected, is pretty nerfed. Howler, Hand of Wisdom action, has been reduced. Probably still pretty high DPS gloves overall, but again, a bit like Archmage, it's something you probably want to build into a lot more. It's not just going to be higher damage on a build that's not even attribute stacking, which is what it was for some builds. Pillar of the Caged God has been halved. Passives that give especially percentage scaling to attributes have been nerfed a bit across the board, and Gemling Legionnaire's enhanced effectiveness node now has a downside of 20% less attributes, so it's about scaling the bonus from attributes, not about the raw total number of attributes, so it's not as good for attribute stacking, but it's kind of its own unique thing now. Gemling Legionnaire did get some other nice changes outside of that though. Heralds no longer chain or proliferate. This has been mentioned plenty of times, but I'll bring it up again here just in case you don't know. Heralds can't trigger themselves anymore to chain through enemies, so the days of every single build being a Herald build are probably behind us, hopefully. On Freeze, Electrocute, and Pin, they've all been nerfed in terms of build up on monsters by about half, so that implies it takes about twice as long to build up to one of these sorts of status ailments. There are a few notes though. For Freeze, for example, a lot of the skills that have freeze bonuses on them, so cold skills, have had their freeze build up increased to compensate, so the intention wasn't really to nerf those so much. A lot of them kind of break even. It was probably more for some other sort of converted freeze stuff or skills that weren't really intended to freeze quite as much. Honestly, Freeze was very powerful, should still be very powerful, but maybe half as powerful now. The primed for Electrocute and stun, conversely, mechanics can now be done earlier, which is quite nice. It's 70% for unique monsters now instead of 80% for that primed condition to occur. And finally, Pin did get buffed to prevent monster evasion, and it also caused them to be light stunned for things that care about that. So Pin got a nice little buff there, even though it is twice as hard to apply. A note on runes. Basic runes now come in lesser, normal, and greater variants. This was kind of already known, but an important detail from the patch notes is that the reforging bench can upgrade them. This is one you definitely want to know about because you can take 3 lesser runes and upgrade them to a normal rune, and then 3 normal runes to upgrade them to a greater rune. They likely need to be the same type, as that would make sense, but this is something that you will want to do when you get a surplus of lower tier runes. If you're playing hardcore, you should know that logouts have been nerfed, although this is kind of a buff for the rest of us. If you exit the game while in end game map area, logging back into that same character, resuming, will now place you back inside the map at the spot you're in, presumably it sounds like. So you're not really able to dodge it, which is originally what they had planned on doing and what had been explained would be occurring, that you wouldn't be able to like log out to avoid deaths and stuff. Technically, there's ways around it. You can wait 15 minutes or whatever for your map to expire and then you'll get placed in your hideout. But this is a positive for most of us who aren't, doing that sort of thing, because it just means that if the game crashes or if we log out for a second and we log back in, then we can just pick up where we left off. Phys damage builds and armor break got some nice buffs. Fully broken armor now causes enemies to take 20% increased physical damage from hits, and armor on all monsters has been reduced by 30%. So even builds that have just like that little bit of leftover Phys will probably get some bit of extra damage out of that. The broken armor note about 20% increased physical damage taken was specifically in the patch notes section on monsters and monster changes. Nothing there suggests that this applies to players as well, but if this is a fundamental change to broken armor, then in theory broken armor on players could also apply that 20% increased physical damage taken. Although that's kind of like, it's evenly applied to everyone, whereas broken armor didn't affect non-armor builds before, so it kind of is a across the board change. Something we'll have to keep an eye out for maybe. Player ailment threshold is a huge change. We knew this one was coming, but the idea is that they want ailments to matter a lot more. They want freeze, shock, and ignite to be more present and scary, and to encourage investment into actually protecting against them instead of mostly just ignoring them, maybe just kind of like getting a little bit of something. It was pretty low investment a lot of the time to solve any sort of problems there. The way they did it was by effectively halving the base ailment threshold that you have based on life. It was previously based on all of your life. Now it's half of your life. So effectively, we are half as good at resisting ailments by default without any investment. So you want to consider strongly what measures you want to take in your builds. Every build probably wants to think about this to some capacity. We'll see how bad it feels exactly. But yeah, you'll want to consider ailment thresholds, reduced ailment durations, charms, and so on. Similarly, player stun has been changed. Heavy stun is 3 seconds from 1, so that's much more significant. You can't be heavy stun just randomly. It only happens if a game mechanic explicitly states it, such as raise shield, parry, and rower dismounts. I don't know if there's some boss mechanics maybe that do it as well, but it's very specific situations where you can be heavy stunned. Conversely though, there are some nice changes here too, such as you can't be light stunned now while active block or parrying. Evasion also now works while active block or parrying. It applies to avoid stun buildup. It doesn't let you evade attacks, but it does avoid that stun buildup. Evasion doesn't work while you're heavy stunned and rolling on the floor now, which kind of makes sense. But just a side note, armor does, so I guess that's technically kind of an armor buff. Your armor will protect you while you're on the floor. And unwavering stance is now light stun immunity as well, not just like a resistance thing like it was before. With the addition of parry, GGG looked at raised shield and thought it was kind of lame, and they added a shield bash mechanic to it now as well. So if you release raised shield immediately after blocking a skill, it now performs a shield bash that damages and stuns enemies in front of you, and also dazes them if you're using a tower shield. So it's a nice little buff to raised shield there to make it a bit more useful, engaging, and cool. For some of the biggest kind of class/archetype buffs, Warrior and Mercenary got the biggest things there as predicted. In addition to the shield bash change and some of the other stuff I already talked about, there are some nice improvements here. They did have some targeted nerfs in specific places. Some of them are a little bit confusing, which I'll talk about later, but Warrior and Merc did see the biggest buffs as classes overall. So Mercenary's crossbow damage, well, crossbow for anyone, but obviously Mercenary is the theme here. Crossbow damage has been increased dramatically. They were using one-handed added damage modifiers before, I don't know why, but that they were. And base damage on the crossbows has been increased as well. The gemling was nerfed for attribute stacking, as I mentioned before, but overall it got some decent buffs to its other nodes. The tactician, the new ascendancy for the mercenary, seems to have people excited, especially a lot of mentions about ballistas, so that could be worth looking into. And the witch hunter got some very nice buffs actually. The concentration damage was increased, and sorcery ward's penalty was lowered, and its cooldown was reduced. I already quite liked sorcery ward. I thought it was pretty powerful. Maybe alone in that one. I know witch hunter's not very popular, but that's a pretty sizable buff to that. I really like sorcery ward for running Trial of Sechimas. The warrior also saw some nice buffs in a few different places. The Smith of Katava, the new ascendancy, is looking very popular for League starters. A lot of people are excited about it. Ancestrally boosted slams, such as Fist of War, got a damage buff, which is quite nice, from 20 to 30%. Titan and Warbringer both got a bunch of buffs to their nodes, a lot of the lesser used ones especially. The Primed for Stun, as I mentioned before, got buffed, so that's really good for Bone Shatter. The previously mentioned Armor Break change, 20% increased Phys damage bonus, is great for a lot of warriors, obviously, but also some of the specific payoffs for Armor Break have been boosted as well. And Rolling Slam and Sunder are both faster. I do hope we see a few more improvements in like the base speed of some of the lower level stuff, but those were two of the biggest offenders in terms of being really slow, so that does help leveling experience, and of course if you want to use those skills long term. A couple just rapid fire notable support and item changes. Scattershot damage was nerfed, so it's a bit less mandatory now. Probably still have to use it somewhere in most projectile builds, but it does deal a bit less damage now, so you might want to consider if it's just something you're doing more for utility rather than damage scaling, because the shotgunning potential of it maybe is a bit lower now due to that damage nerf. Spell Echo cannot support triggered skills, so no more echoed meteor on cast on freeze and things like that. It really never made sense that Spell Echo worked that way. That's not how it worked in Path of Exile 1, so that change was not too surprising, but is very noteworthy. And Ingenuity belt, as expected, was nerfed, but it was kind of mega nerfed. It can get some charm stuff now. High rolls across the board are probably still quite chase and valuable, because ultimately rings are very powerful, and even the like low amount that you can get from it now is still pretty big scaling that effectively gives you stats on a belt slot that you can't normally get, like flight damage. So it probably still has a place with higher rolls, but low rolls are probably worthless outside of Varling. It looks really bad at low rolls. A few head scratches. This is changes I don't really understand, or I think are bad. Hopefully with some context in hindsight, they'll make sense, but I feel it's good to at least mention a couple things I don't really like from the patch notes, you know, for fairness sake. The cruel version of Candlemass's Essence now provides 5% increased life. It was previously 8%. Like, why? Why did they nerf this? It feels like there had to be a discussion about this at some point, like, oh yes, we definitely should do that. Like, huh? To what end? For what reason? I don't understand. So it would be great to have some context on that. Or maybe there was a logical train of thought for that one, but anyway, it has me scratching my head. Similarly, grenades had their cooldown increased, nearly all of them except cluster, I think. So crossbow damage was obviously heavily buffed, so maybe they were worried about them doing too much damage, but cooldown I don't think was the way to go with that. Cooldown makes them much less nice to play as like a play style. It means that you really probably do have to use two different grenades to alternate between, because even heavily invested in cooldown, which you kind of wanted to do anyway, because that was how you scaled DPS ultimately, it's going to be much less comfortable to play now, so I don't really know why they've done that. It's not like it was an overly popular playstyle. Bit of a head scratcher. I assume it's because they want you to mix grenades in with other skills. I don't know. Don't know about that one. Would love to hear some insights into that too. Similarly, curse delay increased for some reason, so it takes longer for the curse to activate now, which people were kind of already a little bit annoyed about that mechanic, and now it's a bit worse, so monsters move out of the way before the curse goes off. I don't know why they're doing this. And no shocked ground from lightning warp and ball lightning. Honestly, like, that was such a specific and effortful combination to do for shocked ground. It was probably mostly because it was used in like pinnacle boss insta-killing and stuff, but I don't know, like there's other easy ways to get shocked ground. I don't really know why this in particular had to be nerfed like that. Next up, there was no specific mentions of slowing down enemies at endgame. I think the idea of bringing top end player down a lot here in this patch was obviously like something they really wanted to do, but it did mean that this was the kind of opportune moment to just at least make some token changes in this regard. I don't actually think that too many things in endgame are too fast. You know, there's not a lot of like haste stacked rare monsters and things like that nowadays. There's a couple swarmy things like Breach and stuff like that, but I still think that some token changes in this regard would have been good, just to show that that's kind of the direction that they want to go with this. They want to bring the player down a lot, but they also want to make monsters a little bit less fast, so the end game feels a bit more like Path of Exile 2. So I think they missed the opportunity here. It doesn't necessarily mean they're not doing that. It's just timing. And finally, Flame Blast got reworked into a cooldown skill. I kind of get that, but then they also nerfed it a lot on top of that, it seems. I don't really know what's going on there. I didn't really play Flame Blast in the past, but people are definitely confused about this. I was confused when I saw the numbers, and then I saw the other people's reaction to it, and I was like, I don't know what they're going for with that one. They're making it like a spell-based Hammer of the Gods, I suppose, but then why the heavy nerfs on top of that? I don't really know. And then to tie things up, some good stuff, some nice little things. Pinnacle bosses no longer have armor penetration, so that's an armor buff. Woo! Worn Sandals, it's the movement speed slow affliction in Sekimas, the one that was like, you know, a run ender a lot of the time. That is now only active when you get hit and is less, so that's much less painful. You can actually take that now if you're playing reasonably well, and most importantly, it won't get you killed in the final boss Hourglass phase, because you won't have that movement speed penalty because you're not getting hit during that phase. So that's an excellent change there for Trial of Sekimas, on top of the fact that the boss now has much less life. Ascending in Trial of Sekimas is going to be much smoother for much more of you, so get on that earlier. Player presence area was lowered, so that's a nerf. Why is it here? Well, because if you mouse over the presence tooltip now, it'll show you the radius in-game of your current presence. This is in this positive list because this sort of mechanical communication of in-game effects needs to happen more often. It's awesome. I love that. I want to see that more. No more of this like recently nearby on a Tuesday stuff that you're just gonna have to guess about. I love this idea, like show a circle in the game of how this thing works. Good job, GGG. More of that. And then finally, my favorite change of all, reduced the intensity of the fog in Delirium encounters. Apparently significantly, we'll see what it looks like, but that was just so over the top. I'm very happy about that one. I think I probably missed some important things for sure, but if you think I missed something that was really important that wasn't just skill balance stuff, yell at me in the comments below so that we can all read it. And stop by stream for launch for some Huntress action, but that's it for now. I'm Ziggy D, and thanks for watching.